Good morning, everyone. It's really great to see so many of you here today. Welcome to our Education Day. Um, my name's Kat, and I've been organizing this Education Day along with my colleagues, Harriet and Amara, also on the call here today. We have several speakers joining us today to talk about remote teaching. First up will be Jackie Sue, who's the project manager at AD Instruments. This will be followed by Dr. Ian Rowe from the University of Glasgow, who has extensive teaching experience. And finally, in our last session, we will have Tom Broughton, our customer success manager, who will be sharing tips and tricks about LT with you. So just before I hand over to Jackie, please note the session is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube. Throughout the talks, you're very welcome to ask questions using the live Q&A bar at the bottom of your screen, and panelists will answer your questions via text. And then at the end of the session, we will have a live Q&A workshop where you have the opportunity to unmute yourself and ask questions verbally. But in the meantime, we will have a selection of panelists answering your questions, to include the sales team and Amy Boucher, Head of Education at AD Instruments. Yeah, so that's that. We really hope that you find the sessions useful and come away with some new ideas. Over to you, Jackie.
All right, can you see my screen right now?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Oh, all right. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Jackie. Thank you for the short introduction, Kat. So right now I'm a project manager at AD Instruments, and a few of the big projects that I've been working on recently are the Anatomy collection and the Understand Your Physiology collection. So before I was a project manager, I was working on the content team, developing content. And then before that, I was teaching physiology at the University of Otago. So I was a teaching fellow there, and I was mainly teaching into labs and also doing some tutorial work. At the moment, my biggest project is LT sensors, and because this is my big project, I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So what the sensors are, how you use them, why they might be interesting to you. But I don't want it to just be a sales pitch or anything like that. So I want to make it relevant to you. So I want to talk about how labs have changed this year, and how LT and LT sensors might provide some solutions or fit within that new educational landscape. So firstly, a little bit of background on why we made LT sensors in the first place. So this quote here is one of the company's top challenges. So it is to empower life science educators to connect across traditional and future teaching methods in one ideal platform. In the context of LT sensors, we wanted to create one complete lab solution. So that means integrating content, hardware and software into one ideal platform, so that you've got, an integrated lab experience. So a bit of feedback about what customers wanted for data acquisition is this. So we have heard that people want something that's affordable. So student numbers are growing, but the available funds to support those students aren't necessarily growing at the same rate. Customers wanted greater flexibility in use case. So this is especially true during COVID right now, where you might need to transition between face-to-face and remote learning, or just in general, lab spaces are quite expensive and difficult to maintain. And so you might be, some institutions might be lacking in available lab spaces. And so having something that can be a bit more flexible in its use case so that you're not tied to one big lab, that's going to be useful. In terms of students that are just starting out with data acquisition, the solution or the hardware that they use needs to be intuitive and really easy to use, nice and simple. And educators are looking for that authentic lab experience. So that means students record their own data, they can analyze their own data, and so therefore it's relevant to themselves. So what are LT sensors? These are our low-cost, easy to use, plug and play sensors, and they have a USB end, so it plugs straight into your computer. This is the collection here. So a lot of you will be familiar with a power lab, and a power lab is that grey box where you plug transducers into the power lab, and it acts as this interface between the transducers and the computer and allows you to record data and analyze it. Well, analyze it in LT or some other software platform. That Power Lab is involved in amplifying the signal and filtering out noise. But with these sensors, we've kind of bypassed this a little bit. So you can see that each of these has a USB end, and within that USB end is a little is some circuitry that helps to amplify the signal, and then filtering of noise has been worked into the software. So overall, you need less equipment to run these things. We are estimating a release around mid-November. So by a release date, this means that you can start ordering these things, but just keep in mind that we won't be shipping until mid-January. So that's, a while away. It's a lead time of about 2 months. So this is there are 8 sensors in the first bit of the collection that we're going to release. So in November. So these sensors are the biopotential, which records the ECG, EMG, EOG, and EEG. We've got the finger pulse for heart rate measurements and pulse, tendon hammer for reflex measurements, grip force for measuring experiments in muscle fatigue and grip strength, the respiratory belt for respiratory rate, skin temperature probe for measuring skin surface temperature, cardiomicrophone for heart sounds, and the blood pressure cuff for measuring blood pressure measurements. Okay, so why are these sensors valuable? Or what value could it bring to you? So like I said before, they're really easy to use. You simply plug it into the computer and use it. Together, it's an integrated lab solution. So together, LT and LT sensors has content, software, and hardware combined into one lab package. Because you don't need to use a power lab with this equipment, there's less equipment overall, so it's a little bit more portable and flexible. This means that it opens up the possibility for data acquisition in different locations. You're not necessarily tied to that traditional lab setup. You can run experiments in smaller groups and in different locations. So I'm going to talk a little bit in how it's flexible in face-to-face and remote learning in the next few slides. It is affordable, so lower cost than some of the other equipment that we have. LT has content and admin capability. You can author and you can assess within this platform. And then LT sensors, that collection of 8 sensors covers a really wide range of signals. LT sensors will work with a specific human physiology collection that's been adapted for these sensors. So we've got this pre-built content. Labs, or a lot of our popular labs have been adapted for these sensors. And of course, you've got that automatic grading in LT, which reduces time demands. And we think that this provides an authentic lab experience. So again, students are recording their own data, analyzing their own data, and so it's relevant to them. Okay, so I know that a lot of you will be Power Lab users. I want to reassure you that there is still a space for Power Lab out there. But just in case you're wondering what the difference is between LT sensors and Power Lab, here's a nice table to compare the two. So we'll start with the Power Lab. We've got this Power Lab interface, which is a box that acts as that join between the computer and the transducers. So you plug the transducers into the Power Lab, that feeds into the computer, and then you can record your own data and then analyze it with an LT or lab station or whatever it is that you use. This is in contrast to LT sensors, which plug directly into a laptop or desktop computer via a USB. We are viewing Power Lab as our advanced option, so it's for preparing students for research and data acquisition. It's compatible with a lot of different things, so LT, LabChart, Lightning, and Lab Station. And it's also, because it's compatible with all of these different things, there is a greater authoring capability. So specifically, authors can create their own settings files. They can take the settings files that have been provided in labs and modify them so they can remove components that they don't want anymore or add components. And there's also a larger content offering. So Power Lab, you've got the human physiology collection plus exercise physiology, psychophysiology, neuroscience, biology, and more. But if we look at LT sensors, LT sensors is a great entry level option. So students that are only just getting used to data acquisition. Upon release, it is, well, no, not upon release, but just overall, it is available in LT only. Okay, so LT sensors is limited to LT, and upon release, you've only got access to these preset settings files. So settings files that the content team have created and are available in the labs themselves. We've also got a content or like a settings file library that you can choose the settings files that are relevant to you, but I'm not really going to talk about that in this chat. So if you want to know more information about that, you can message the Q&A group. Because it's available in LT only and because you're limited to preset settings files, this means that with LT sensors, you can't create your own settings files and you can't modify the ones that are there. Content. So we have adapted the human physiology collection that is specific to LT sensors. So some of the adaptations include changes in the images for setups and modifications to the setup videos as well, so that they reflect LT sensors and not Power Lab. Just note that there are a few differences in the activities that are available as well, and the labs that are available. So LT sensors, we don't have things like a 12-lead ECG setup, and we don't have a nerve stimulator, and so we don't have, there are two labs that require nerve stimulation that are available in the normal human physiology collection, but not available with the LT sensor human physiology collection. Also, upon first release, we don't have a spirometer, and so there aren't any labs involving the spirometer, but the spirometer will come in the future. All right, so I wanted to ask you a few questions about how you've run your labs this year, how they've changed, or what adaptations you've had to make, and also how your students have found your labs. So a little bit of crowd participation. I've got some polls. So, question number 1. How have you been performing your practical labs this year? So just select one option. Um, I'm going to launch the polling, and you've got about 30 seconds to a minute to answer. And go. So we've got a few more people that still need to vote. And few more seconds. Done. Okay, I'm not sure why there are different colors. I guess the red means that with most people are using virtual labs. I think that's what it means. Okay, this is the first time that I've used polls in Zoom, so I'm not really sure how it works. But okay, so some of you students have been performing the labs in smaller groups. Some have removed labs from the curriculum or having students complete the lab from home. No one has continued to run labs normally. A lot of you have turned to virtual labs or a mix. Oh, interesting. Great. Okay. So question number 2. What changes have you made to your labs as a result of the change that you chose before? So this is multiple choice. You can choose several options. And go. Ten seconds to go. All right, so most people have been recording videos to help with instruction. That's awesome. Some of you have had to adjust the length of time that a lab takes to complete. Remove activities from labs or replace activities. Lots of live video calls. I hear that a lot of people are experiencing Zoom fatigue and wearing PPE. All right, okay, so lots of changes. Third question, in this transition from traditional to remote learning, what have students struggled with the most? So try and choose your top 3, otherwise it might be all of them. So about 5 more seconds. All right, cool. So, that's interesting. So a lot of students have struggled with the lack of community, and it's great that you can, well, it's not great that it's happening, but it's awesome that you have, I guess, identified this. Lots of difficulties and problems associated with modern technology as well. Low engagement, poor time management, not too bad though. Difficulty understanding theory without hands-on practice. Students not prepared to balance family and work and social lives. And difficulty understanding instructional goals. Okay, so that's great. Okay. All right then. So I am gonna go back to the PowerPoint. Kat, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can still see the PowerPoint on screen?
Yep, I can still see LT on one side and question time on the other.
Oh, okay. So can you see the monkey in the background as well?
And no monkeys
Okay,
on the call
that's great.
today.
All right. um, excellent. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. So I wanted to, after those questions, I want to invite you to think about this teaching scenario that's probably very, very common to a lot of you. So a university is shut down 2 weeks into the semester when educators have already planned the curriculum. What are you going to do? And how can LT and LT sensors help? So I wanted to invite you to think about labs in a slightly different way. So I like to think of it in terms of the physical, social, and psychological aspects. Oh, I'm just going to close the poll, by the way. So in terms of the physical aspect of labs, labs are more than just a physical space, they're an environment for learning and teaching. In terms of the social aspect, it's an opportunity to learn and teach in a slightly more social environment. Psychologically, labs are like that intermediate step where you support students to bridge that gap between theory and practice. And students understand that they have that support when they're building those scientific skills. So to elaborate on this a little bit more, what do I mean by the physical aspects of a lab? So if you're a student, a lab presents not only just a physical space, but it's an alternative to the conventional classroom. Think about things like the furniture and lighting and air quality and decor. So labs often have nice clean lines and uncluttered tables. If you look at the walls, there are bright posters around the room and models that you can interact with and touch. In terms of equipment and resources and technology, everything that you need to perform those activities and to build those scientific skills are in one space. Like, for example, all of the equipment that you need is presented on a tray in front of you, or it is arranged at different stations around the room. And even those stations are arranged in a way that allows for efficient movement around the room or efficient or for students to efficiently complete their activities. There are also set safety and hygiene practices, so maybe safety signs around the room, and also just even like wearing the lab coat. Um, these all add to that physical environment. If you are an educator, you can show up 15 minutes before you are to teach the lab, and you know that the lab technicians have already set everything up for you. So all of the equipment, resources, and technology, it's organized in a student-friendly way. You can focus your energy on interacting with students and building rapport and sharing anecdotes and having conversations rather than trying to think about how to set the lab up and how it can be efficiently run. Right, so if we go back to that teaching scenario before, you've been shut down 2 weeks into semester once your curriculum's already set out. So your initial problem is how do you get the necessary resources to students so that you can continue running those labs? Let's say you've got LT and you've got LT sensors. So you can run this in a traditional lab setup. If you were to do that, then the LT sensors would just be in front of the students in the lab space, and they'd just use it as they would normally. However, if you suddenly had to account for social distancing, LT is accessible anywhere with an internet connection, and LT sensors are pretty lightweight and they're portable, which means that they're a bit more flexible in the way that they can be used. So examples of how you could use this include separating students into smaller lab spaces or groups. Let's say you can't actually run a lab with 96 students in a room anymore. You might have to run groups of 10 students through a lab at a time, and you can set this up in little classrooms or something to reduce the amount of social interaction. You could also allow students to take sensors home to complete labs. Um, or alternatively, you could have one set of sensors between a group, let's say of 6 students that are in a similar geographical location. So the idea there would be that one student uses the LT sensors, they record their own data, they analyze their own data, and then they drop that equipment to the next student. And so eventually everyone gets a turn. If you really didn't have time to set up any actual data acquisition, LT has example data, which is great because that's kind of like your safety net. If you can't actually run any data acquisition labs, you can always fall back on this example data. So the takeaway here is that LT provides a little bit of security during this very hectic time in education when you might need to transition between face-to-face and remote learning. Okay, so now you've got your labs set up, you've got all of these new e-learning tools to help you run the labs remotely, but students are reporting feeling overwhelmed, and you're finding it really overwhelming as an educator as well. You spend heaps and heaps of time on Zoom and you don't get any social interaction back. So how can LT and LT sensors help you now, so in the short term versus later? So now or in the short term, you've got a bit of flexibility in how you want to set up the lab, which is great, but you're also maintaining that authentic lab experience. So authentic lab experience meaning students can still record their own data and analyze their own data, and it's relevant to themselves. LT is very intuitive to use with a modern interface, and so are LT sensors as well. Just plug and play. The fact that these two things are very easy to use means that there's less cognitive load on students to try and learn these new tools. Like I said before, we've got the human physiology collection and these pre-made labs that can be used at the get-go. So this is going to reduce time demands in developing a new curriculum. So this includes setup videos, step-by-step instructions, example data, and also integrated question feedback. And these things are going to be really important, especially if you're not there to actually guide students through a lab. So authoring, it's very easy to author within LT. Let's say that you use one of our LT labs and it usually took you 3 hours. It's very easy to remove some labs if you needed to focus on just a few key concepts. And I think a few of you have done that. I think in the poll that we ran before, you mentioned altering your labs or maybe making the labs a little bit shorter. In the long term, Again, you've got that flexibility in face-to-face and remote learning setups with no additional cost. So what I mean by no additional cost is if you look at some other products on the market, um, you might have a distance learning device that only records a few signals. It's handy because you can use it fully from home, but it's not something that you would necessarily want to use when you go back to face-to-face teaching. So there's a cost associated with it that you can't use in both face-to-face and remote learning setups. With LT sensors, you can use it in both. A lot of our customers start off using our pre-made content and then they choose to modify it over time. So overall, LT and LT sensors ensures that your efforts aren't wasted if you suddenly have to change in the way that you teach, and students can easily move between a lab space and home. All right, social aspect of labs. So labs are an opportunity to learn and teach in a more social environment. So if you are a student, think about how labs allow you to have that one-on-one face-to-face instruction. You've got a back and forth dialogue that's a little bit more conversational. Um, and it's a great opportunity to affirm or correct any assumptions with educators or peers, especially in terms of safety procedures. Um, it's also an opportunity to meet other students and build those social contacts and support for study groups, and or if you're just finding the content really hard, and decreased anonymity. So what I mean by that is, imagine that you are a student in a sea of faces in a lecture theatre. It's very easy to feel like like that your contribution doesn't matter as much when you're in a sea of different people. If you're an educator, it's an opportunity for you to put a name to the face of those anonymous students in your lecture theatre, and an opportunity to build rapport, especially through more conversational language. It doesn't have to be quite as formal. I think it's a really great opportunity for educators to actually improve their own teaching. So as they talk to students, especially through, this more conversational language, they can identify and fix any student assumptions and modify their teaching style or their content based on that feedback that they get. I'm going to jump straight to psychological now, because I think that there's a lot of overlap there. So labs are this intermediate step where students are supported and guided through that gap between theory and practice, so they can build their scientific skills in this supportive way. Yeah, if you're a student, labs are an opportunity to ask dumb questions. So I think when I was teaching labs, and I think when a lot of you are teaching labs, try and think about how many times a student will say, so this might be a dumb question, but, and it's not actually a very dumb question. It's a question that a lot of other students are having trouble with as well, but they're just brave enough to ask it. So yeah, it's asking these sorts of questions on a public forum seems a lot more daunting than being able to quietly ask someone face to face. The fact that a lab is a space that is run at a set time, it means that students know that they can go to that space, they're motivated to complete the task within that time, and then they know that they can tick that off their list of things to do once that's done. And of course, there's active engagement through hands-on activities. If you are an educator, labs are an opportunity to assess whether students are engaged with the material and get feedback on your own performance. So remember that a lot of our communication is non-verbal. This is probably why a lot of you may be struggling with Zoom. So through Zoom, you can't pick up on facial expressions and gestures and body language quite as easily, and a lot of our communication is that. And also, I think that you gain a lot of motivation and energy as you interact with students as well. All right, so I'm running a little bit behind on time. I only have a few more slides left. So back to this teaching scenario, you've been shut down 2 weeks into semester. How does this relate to the social and psychological aspects? So firstly, can students continue to do their group work and communicate if they have to socially distance from each other? So here is a little workaround on how you can do some remote group work. It involves using Zoom or Microsoft Teams. So it's a pretty simple concept, but essentially you get students to form groups, but they're all working remotely from their own device at home. One student is assigned the group leader for that lab, and as the group leader, they need to book a meeting using Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and they're also the host of that meeting. And as the host, when they go to sign in using the group login function here, they would grant control of the keyboard to each team member. So that's essentially like sharing their screen. And then as they do that, everyone can fill in their details, they can log in as a group, and then the group leader would retain control of the keyboard and they would perform the experiment with the LT sensors that are in front of them. And other students in the team can contribute through audio, or you can assign them different roles depending on what the lab is. So obviously this is a little bit more work for the group leader, but I would encourage you to, if you were to do something like this, get students to form teams or form groups and maintain those groups so that you can share who, or you can divvy up who is the group leader for different labs that are run so that everyone has a turn being group leader essentially. Okay, how can you increase student engagement? So a few suggestions: make learning relevant to everyday life. And I think a lot of you probably already have. You've been authoring or like changing the activities. So you can change activities to fit with items that they have available at home. For example, students record EMG while picking up items of different weight around the house. Um, add more multimedia to increase student engagement. So a lot of you have been recording your own videos and adding them into your lessons, which is great. But think about other ways that you can add multimedia into your lessons. So videos and audio are great because it gives the labs more personality, and it like acts as that support and that safety for students. For anyone that is a little bit camera shy, remember that it adds a lot to the lab and students really appreciate having it. And videos and audio don't have to be perfect, like small mistakes and bloopers are very endearing. Final suggestion here, add some upload and annotate panels. So get students to upload photos of themselves performing the experiment and get their pets and their housemates involved. Here I got one of my workmates to get his cat involved. It's a very confused looking cat. I like it. Okay, last slide on this. So how can you monitor student engagement using LT and LT sensors? So I'm going to breeze over this a little bit because I think Tom's going to talk about it soon. But you can you can check engagement through these new lesson analytics. So you can look at your class progress in each lesson and across your course, and it gives you insights onto where students are at in the lesson and what answers they're providing. And invite feedback. So add questions to get students to reflect on their learning and provide feedback on engagement at the end of each lesson. Okay, so I'm sorry that I went a little bit over time. This is my summary here. So physical, social, and psychological aspects of labs can all be targeted using LT and LT sensors. Okay, so sorry, I've gone very over time, but I was wondering, does anyone have any questions?
If anyone would like to ask a question verbally, just feel free to use the raise hand function and we can help you unmute yourself if you would like.
Hey Jackie, there's a good question from Darren about using multiple sensors in the same lesson at the same time. I just wondered if you could maybe answer that live, please.
Okay. I don't think that there is like I don't know if there is a maximum number of sensors that you can use, but at the very start, you're going to be limited to preset settings files. So I don't think that there'd be any more than 3 sensors used at a time in any of our labs that we have available. Yeah, but you can use several sensors at once. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to, can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is Amy. Hi, everyone. Darren, you had asked in that question, for example, using the blood pressure cuff and the cardio mic together. So yes, you would be able to record both of those at the same time. So much like our existing blood pressure lesson, those would be able to be used in conjunction together.
Hopefully, hopefully you guys gained something from my talk or you learned something new. I tried not to go too in depth about the things about LT that you probably already know. So I tried to show off some kind of new things. Yeah. Is anyone interested in LT sensors? Does that tickle your fancy?
I think there's another question in the live Q&A from Richard.
What is that?
So if they are in a small group or in a small bubble, oh, sorry. I'm not quite sure what. Richard, do you want to ask your question verbally?
I think that was Richard asked a question before and I responded. I think he's asking a further question in response to my answer. So I'll maybe type an answer back to him, and if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. All right. So if nobody has any more questions, I guess we can pause it for now and then reconvene at 11 o'clock, where we will have Dr. Ian Rowe from the University of Glasgow presenting to us. So yeah, last chance. If anyone has any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, we will see you at 11. All right. So we're going to pause the recording and pause the live streaming on YouTube. The webinar is still going to keep going, but you're very welcome to kind of take a break and come back at 11 for Dr. Ian Rowe. Thank you very much for joining.